wings are correlated with being able to fly. But then what we did is we found, can anybody think of something with wings that can't fly?
Chicken.
Chicken. Okay, so now when I put a chicken, it's like, oh, I now test this with chicken, and I say, oh, my theory of animals with wings can fly is no longer good. I have to refine the theory a little bit more. All right. So you say, I found an anomaly here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to refine the theory, and I can say something like, animals with wings that, unless you're a chicken, or animals with wings that have some other characteristic, But what that process does is it allows you to refine the theory by narrowing what the description is. Okay, and if you keep going through, and it's like, okay, let's look at turkeys. So you can say animals that are not chickens, that are not stupid, who have wings can fly. Right? And you keep going around and around, and then eventually, eventually there was this, I think, Italian by the name of Bernoulli. Okay, and he found that animals that had a wing structure where air flowing over the wing would flow faster than under the wing, therefore generating lift. Animals with an airfoil type wing structure would be able to fly. Right? So then the Wright brothers said, the better correlation is, all these animals, and now that I understand the causality, now I can have a better theory, which says if I have this airfoil structure, then I'll be able to fly. Okay, and then the Wright brothers used airplane. Okay, there were still exceptions to that. Right? When the plane crashed, they say, well, is this still good? Right? And then usually what they found is the plane crashed because there was ice on the wings or something, and this didn't work anymore. But that's an example of how you build a theory starting with correlation, okay, and then move up the ladder, if you will, and refine the theory. By the way, instead of animals, these could be companies. Right? These could be Taiwan PC makers who make money and can't make money, don't make money. Okay? And so then what would be your theory? And then you say, well, actually there aren't very many Taiwan PC makers anymore. How about Taiwan LED makers who make money and ones who don't make money? Then you might start with a theory and say, okay, that's a correlation. Let me test these things and look for anomalies like that as a way of defining my theory. Okay, does that make sense? So, building theory is all about, first I'm going to get a whole bunch of samples. I'm going to observe and describe and measure the phenomena. I'm going to observe, describe, and measure the phenomena. And then what I'll do is I'll say, I want to categorize by attributes of the phenomena. And then, I'll have a preliminary statement of correlation. And then what I'll say is, based on this, let me predict and see, does this work on other animals? Does this work on other companies? Okay, and if I confirm that, that's good. And I'll just keep going around and looking as many cases as I can. And so building descriptive theory is really, first I start with observation. First I start with observation, then I classify into categories, define those relationships with correlations, test my hypotheses, predict. Okay, do the same correlations exist in attributes, between attributes and outcomes in a different set of data? Okay, does the same rule of profitability in Taiwanese LED makers apply to different Taiwanese makers of flat panel displays or something like that? But that's how you kind of define theories, and you keep refining using anomalies. Okay, so then, what we talk about is when you have correlation, you have circumstance-based categorization, using your anomalies to categorize these different situations or circumstances. Eventually, when you can establish causality, when you've looked at enough cases, and I have well-established categories of circumstance, then I actually have a prescriptive theory. And when I looked at enough of these things, and I can say, geez, I've looked at many, many things, you know. Actually, I teach with Clayton Christensen at Harvard in this class on disruptive innovation. In his thesis work, he looked at disk drive companies, those that survived and those that were disrupted. Okay, people say, well, how can that be a sample? Right? Well, it turns out there were only about 70 or 80 disk drive companies in all of history. And he looked at every single one. So then he could say, after I've looked at every single one, I've exhaustively looked at all of the categories, and I can unequivocally tell you, based on all these 80 disk drive companies, that under what circumstances it worked and what circumstances it didn't work. And by the way, you can have more than one category, or I mean more than two categories. You can have 3 or 4 categories. Right? In your EMBA, did you learn about 2x2s? You know, actually, one of our friends who's running a division of General Motors said, you know, what he learned in MBA school was 2x2, right? And his model was good, bad, good, right? And the goal in management was to go from bad to good. Okay. You know, all this is 4 categories. It could be looking down at the top of the pyramid and say, well, you know, there's 4 categories. Okay. These types of 2x2s lull people into thinking, you know, I've comprehensively looked at all the cases, right? But it's just kind of a top view of the pyramid. You still need to test the theory. Okay, so let me ask this question. You know, when you look at theory in business, it's really an iterative process, right? So I showed you this process of developing theory. You know, one of the things we do in my class at Harvard is we hand out 4 papers from the Harvard Business Review, and we ask the students, is this paper good theory or bad theory? Or actually, where is it in the stage of development? Is it actually just rudimentary correlation? Okay, or do they actually have causality understood? Because a lot of people, when they read business papers, they read theory, they assume it's causality, and sometimes it isn't. Right? So, for example, a very famous example in the United States is General Electric Company. Okay, and the conventional wisdom in the United States is GE trains good managers. Okay, so the theory would be manager grew up at GE or manager didn't grow up at GE. Okay, so my theory should be if I hire a GE manager, he or she should do very well. Okay, and then what you do is you go, you know, and there are papers written on this, right? In fact, many of the newspapers talk about, oh, this company hired ex-GE manager, stock price goes up. Okay, well, was it correlation or was it causality? Right. And it turns out the theory there was only correlation because there have been some notable failures recently. Bob Nardelli from GE went to Home Depot, caused a disaster. Right. Then he went to Chrysler. You're going to see what happened. Right. And so, but a lot of people, when they read things, they aren't critical consumers of theory and say, this is just only correlation here. It's not causality. So I have to be careful how I use this. Right. So the whole notion of